that everyone. Yeah, so for today's session, we are going to discuss this text called The Three Principal Aspects of the Path. It's a text by Lama Tsongkhapa, Lama Tsongkhapa. So before we start discussing the text, let's just settle down and just clear the chatter in our minds, focus our minds, and also do a short meditation to set the right motivation for the session. Okay, so make sure you're comfortable in your seats. If you're not very comfortable sitting cross-legged, you can sit in chairs then. Cross-legged, full lotus position if possible. If not, regular sukhasana will do. And keep your backs erect, shoulders straight, limbs relaxed, arms relaxed, and your right palm resting in your left palm with the ends of the thumbs touching each other. And your chin slightly tucked in, and the tip of your tongue resting against the upper row of teeth, just behind the upper row of teeth. And you could keep your eyes half open or closed, your choice. If you're keeping them open, then keep your gaze pointed down the tip of your nose in the space in front of you. And just relax. Make sure there's no stress in any part of your body. And then bring the focus of your mind to the area between your upper lip and the tip of your nose. And just observe the sensations that you experience there. Bring the focus of your mind to your in-breath. Just observe which nostril the in-breath is passing through. It could be your left nostril, could be your right nostril, or could be both. So just observe your in-breath and observe the sensations that you experience there in that nostril. Pressure against the walls of the nostril, the warmth, temperature, whatever it is. Yeah. Just observe the sensations that you experience inside your nostril as you breathe in. So observe the movement of your chest and the abdomen as you breathe in. Observe how the chest rises as you breathe in. turn the focus of your mind to your out breath. Observe the sensations that you experience in the nostril as you breathe out. Again, your breath could be your left through your left nostril or your right nostril. Just observe it and experience. Just observe the sensations that you experience there. Also observe the movement of your chest and the abdomen as you breathe out. Just count your in breath as 1 and out breath as 2, and just count to the 21. With your minds sufficiently focused, now let's do some motivation setting for the session. So just recollect that we've been blessed with this human form in this lifetime. So just think about the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments that characterize our human existence. Think about the 4 freedoms from the unfavorable states of being born in non-human realms. The freedom from suffering in the hell realms, the freedom from hunger, if you were born as a hungry ghost, freedom from the unfavorable condition of stupidity in the animal realm, and being consumed with perpetual pleasure, if you're born as a deity or a god in the god realm. Also think about the 4 unfavorable conditions that we're free from as humans, being born in a remote land completely devoid of Dharma, place which has not been visited by Buddha, being born with inadequate faculties, intelligence, and being born with wrong views. So we are free from all those unfavorable conditions. And also think about the 10 endowments, the 5 personal endowments, and the 5 endowments that pertain to others. So that we are born as a human in a place where the Dharma is still alive, practiced, and 4 kinds of followers are around us. That we are not burdened by any of the 5 inexpiable sins which can bring immediate retribution through rebirth in the hell realms. That we have sufficient faith in the Tripitaka, and that we have adequate intelligence to comprehend the Dharma. Also the 5 endowments that pertain to others, that the Buddha has visited our world that he taught the doctrine, that the doctrine is still uh, in an undegenerate form, that it is still being practiced by its followers, and that there are a lot of benefactors who ensure that the Dharma is accessible to all those who are interested in Dharma. So we are blessed with all these kinds of endowments and freedoms. So indeed, we are quite fortunate. But these 8 freedoms and 10 endowments can't last forever. Can be easily taken away from us, and then it's very difficult to find these 8 freedoms and 10 endowments again. So if we lose these 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments, it's very rare that we can have a human rebirth. Think about the turtle analogy and how improbable it is for the turtle to poke its head through an iron ring floating on the surface of an ocean. A turtle that lives in the depths of the ocean and surfaces only once in 100 years. So getting a human form is even more improbable. And to have a human form with these 8 freedoms and 10 endowments is even more rare. So it's indeed very rare, very difficult to find. So let's resolve that we'll make the most of this opportunity that we've been blessed with, and try our best to extract the most essence out of this life. And the best way to do that is to aspire for complete enlightenment. So that's the most supreme goal that we can deploy our lives towards. So resolve that we'll make the most of this wonderful opportunity that we've been presented with by aspiring for Buddhahood. But for what purpose? Purpose being that we can help other sentient beings who are also trapped in samsara like us, who are also kind of suffering from the same kinds of sufferings that we do. So in order to help them meaningfully out of the cycle of samsara, in order to accomplish their welfare meaningfully, we need to have the same capacity as a completely enlightened Buddha has. So that's the reason we should aspire for Buddhahood. And the gateway, the starting point for our pursuit of that goal would be to develop this mind that aspires for complete enlightenment. The purpose being to help other sentient beings. And this mind is called the mind of enlightenment, or bodhicitta. So just recollect from your previous sessions the 2 ways in which one can develop bodhicitta. So we'll just go quickly through the first method, the 7-fold cause and effect method to develop bodhicitta. So just think about the aspiration and the purpose being to help other sentient beings. So in order to develop this mind of enlightenment, first we need to start with cultivating an attitude of immeasurable equanimity. So just in order to cultivate this attitude, you need to develop your mind in the aspect of even-minded affection towards all sentient beings. And the object of this mind would be the entire sentient kind. So the object is the entire sentient kind, and the subjective aspect is an even-minded affection for all sentient beings. So how do you do that? How do you cultivate this even-minded affection? So just think about the fact that we've been born in samsara for infinite. We have taken infinite births, rebirths in this samsara. Samsara itself is beginningless. And in these lifetimes, we have had friends who assisted us. So in this lifetime, we make this distinction between friends and foes, but those we call as foes, they've been friendly towards us, very kind towards us in the past. So who exactly can be described a foe? Who is a friend? So the best way is to develop an even-minded affection towards all people, all sentient beings. So start with developing this even-minded affection towards your towards strangers, then move on to your dear ones, and then towards your foes. So with that, having cultivated a mind of equanimity, then the next step would be to cultivate a mind that recognizes that all sentient beings are our mothers, have been our mothers in the past. So here again, the object of this mind, this attitude, is the entire sentient kind. And the subjective aspect is recognizing that they're the best form of our friends, that is our mothers. So how do you cultivate this mind? Again, recollect that samsara is beginningless. We've taken infinite rebirths in this samsara. And some of those rebirths have been have been through womb or egg. So whenever we have a womb birth or an egg birth, we have mothers who nurture us. And we've taken rebirth so many times that we've taken rebirth as all kinds of species, multiple number of times. And the number of rebirths that we've taken is much more than the number of sentient beings in this universe. And this is very high probability that each sentient being in this world has been our mother at some point or the other in the past. So cultivate that kind of an attitude and just cultivate the recognition that all sentient beings have been our mothers at some point or the other in the past. So now recognizing that all sentient beings have been our mothers in the past. Now the next step would be to cultivate a mind that remembers the kindness. So just remember the kindness that the mother of your lifetime has extended to you. She's nurtured you at the cost of her own well-being and welfare. So just remember the kindness of the mother of this lifetime, and then cultivate an attitude which wishes to repay the kindness of your the mother sentient beings. So here the object would be all the mother sentient beings, and the subjective aspect would be a wish to repay the kindness of all the mother sentient beings. So think about the mother of this lifetime and how it's possible that she may have engaged in negative actions and accumulated negative karma, and due to which she may have to experience suffering, and how you would like that you help her in a way that she does not have to experience that kind of suffering. So just like you have that kind of wish for your mother of this lifetime, you extend that wish to all the other mother sentient beings also. And then the fourth step would be to cultivate an attitude of love. So again, the object here would be all mother sentient beings who are deprived of genuine happiness. And the subjective aspect of this attitude would be uh, how nice it would be if all mother sentient beings are happy. May they all be happy. And may I be responsible for their happiness. So cultivate your mind in this aspect. And think about the fact that all sentient beings in this world are generally deprived of genuine happiness and even contaminated happiness, and generate a wish that generate an attitude that wishes that they be united with happiness and its causes. Then the fifth step is to develop, cultivate an attitude of compassion. Here, the object of this attitude would be all sentient beings who are tormented by samsaric suffering and deprived of happiness, genuine happiness. And the subjective aspect would be how nice it would be if all sentient beings are free from suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and its causes. And then again, think about the general and specific nature of suffering that characterizes the existence of all sentient beings in this world. Think about specifically the suffering that the mother of this lifetime is experiencing, and how you would desperately want that she be freed from that suffering. And then extend that to other dear ones, and then to the neutral sentient beings, and then to your foes. And cultivate this attitude of great compassion towards all sentient beings. And then cultivate an attitude of sincere resolve. So here again, the object of this attitude will be all sentient beings, all mother sentient beings, and the subjective aspect would be in the nature of taking responsibility that for the relief of suffering of all sentient beings. And this responsibility then induces a very genuine, sincere resolve that I myself will work for the liberation of all the sentient beings from samsaric suffering. So that's the sixth step. And then the seventh step is to generate the mind of enlightenment, of bodhicitta, based on the sincere resolve. Although you have developed this sincere resolve, you cultivated this sincere resolve, you realize that at this moment you do not have the capacity to help other sentient beings meaningfully. And you know that only a completely enlightened Buddha has the capacity to help other sentient beings out of this cycle of suffering. So you would want to develop the same kind of capacity as a completely enlightened Buddha. And hence you develop that aspiration for complete enlightenment, sambodhi. The purpose being to help other sentient beings. And when you develop this attitude, you cultivate this attitude, and it's spontaneous and uncontrived in your mind stream, that's when you're said to have developed bodhicitta. At the moment, it's contrived, but still, it's a good starting point. So just develop your mind in this aspect for a moment, and just rest in that, abide in that mind for a moment. And just read a couple of verses from the Guru Puja to just strengthen our wish for liberation and the wish for complete enlightenment. So just reflect on the meaning of this verse from the Guru Puja. It says, realizing how this body of liberties and endowments is found but once, is difficult to obtain and is easily lost. I seek your blessings, my gurus, to partake of its essence, make it worthwhile, and not be distracted by the meaningless affairs of this life. Also, reflect on this wish, on this verse, which talks about the wish for liberation, violently tossed amidst waves of delusion and karma, plagued by hordes of watery denizens, the three kinds of suffering. I seek your blessings, my gurus, to develop an intense longing to be free from the monstrous ocean of vicious and boundless existence. And then let's also reflect on the bodhicitta prayer. I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merit that I've accrued through my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a completely enlightened Buddha for all the sentient beings. Okay, so with that motivation, let's now begin our discussion of the text. So as I said, the three principal aspects of the path, it's a short text composed by Je Tsongkhapa, and it was actually composed by Je Rinpoche for the benefit of a very close disciple of Je Rinpoche by the name Nawang Thapa. So Nawang Thapa had helped Je Rinpoche when he was practicing in an area where he decided. He made extensive offerings to Je Rinpoche when he was practicing in that area. And then later, Nawang Thapa requested for a teaching from Je Rinpoche. Je Rinpoche then composed these verses. There are 14 verses here in this text. And it's essentially the entire Lamrim condensed in 14 verses. So it talks about the three essential practices that we need to engage in on the graduated path towards enlightenment. So we'll go through what those three essential practices are. So before we look at the actual verses, just for auspiciousness, I'll recite a few prayers. So I'll just recite. If you have the text with you, the sutra remembering the three jewels, you can just go through the text. What's the page number, Shanti? In this text? Not there, right? Okay. All right. Okay. That's okay then. I'll just read out the verses. Iti Buddho Yavanstabhagavaram Sambhuddho Vidyacharan Sampamma Sudhilo Vidanutta Purushdhamma Sariti Shastra Dev Manushanama Buddha Bhavaniti Nishanstata Punyanama Pranasha Pushadamula Namanam Kirshanta Nidama Chitrita Nimanjanaya Kusumita Lakshane Pratirupo Gocharena Pratikula Darshanene Abhirati Shabda Vimutana and Vibhuta Pranya Anvamardaniyo Balaya Shasta Sarvasatva Nama Pita Bodhisattva Nama Raja Padgala Nama Sartva Nirvana Nagara Sampastitana अप्रमेय ज्ञानेन अचिंत प्रतिभानेन विशुद्ध स्वरेण आस्वादनीय घोषेण सचरूपेण प्रतिस्मितायन अलिप्त कामेन नियुक्त रूपे संशिष्टारूपे विप्रमित संदेव्य विसंकृत धातुभ्य संकृत आयतने प्रचिन्न ग्रंथेय विमुक्त परिधारणे परिमुक्त सूक्ष्मना उदाहृतेन परिपूर्ण ज्ञानेन प्रतिष्ठितो अतीतानागतां प्रतिपन्नानां बुद्धानां भगवतां ज्ञान अप्रतिष्ठितो निर्वाण सिद्धभूत कोटयाम स्थित सर्वसत्त्वनो लोकनीयायाम भूमो सर्वैः तथागतानां विशिष्ट समय गुणाः सदर्वस्तु आदो कल्याण मध्य कल्याण परिवसाने कल्याण स्वर्स्यंजन केवल परिपूर्ण परिशुद्ध परिवदात साकत भगवत धर्म सादृष्टि निर्ज्वला आदिक नायक वैश्य प्रत्यात्म वेदनीय विज्ञा भगवतो धर्म विनय सूत्र वेदित नैर्यानिक संबोधिगामी भिन्न संस्तुप सप्रतिशम दक्षिण सुप्रतिपन्न भगवता आर्य संग न्याय प्रतिपन्न रुचि प्रतिपन्न सामिचि प्रतिपन्न अंजलि गण्य सामिचि गण्य कनिष्ठ क्षेत्र महादक्षिण परिशोध रावणीय आवनीय आर्य त्रिरत्नान सुध सूत्रम समाप्तम. We have the 21 phrases in this text. Yeah, right? In English, yeah. Yeah, 189. Page number 189. Read the verses. I'll just read it in Sanskrit. ओम नमो वेद्याऋषि एकविंशति ताराय नमस्तारे वीरक्षण द्वितीय निवेक्षण त्रैलोकनाथ मत्राब्ध विकसित कमलोद्भवे नमः चक्षर चंद्रकंठे विनोदनाय नमः तारासहस्त्र विनय प्रवसत् किन्नोजुले नमः कंकनिलाभ पाणि पद्म विभूषिते दान वीर्य तप शांति दीक्षा ध्यान गोचरे नमस्ते भावभूषणीश विज्ञानंद चारिणि शेष पारमितं प्राप्त दिन पुत्र निशिविते नमस्तुतारुं तार परिताशादिगंतरे सप्तलोक सनातन अशेष करुणाक्षणे नमः शतनानंदे भूत वेताल गंधर्व गणेश प्रस्तुते नमस्त्रदीति भटकार पर्यंत प्रमर्दिनी प्रत्यालीड पद्मासी ज्वाला कुलोज्वले नमस्तुरे महाघोरे मारुवीर विनाशिनी प्रकटिकृत वक्त्राब्ज सर्वशत्रु निशोधिनी नमस्ते रत्नमुद्रांकुरदयाङ्गुली भूषिते भूषिता शैवते चक्रनिकरस्कराकुले नमः प्रमोदितो मुकुटशे प्रसारिणी सत्पस्तुतार्य मारवंशंकरी नमः शांतभूपाल कटलाकर्षणि शमय च गुरुकिंगार सर्वापट विमोचनी नमः श्रीखंडखंडेन्द्र सुमुतावरणोजुले अमिताभ जटावाद भासुरे किन्नोद्रवे नमः कल्पांत भूतज्वाला मालांतस्थिते आदिर्वदितापत् विभुचक्र विनाशिनी नमः करतलघात चरणात भूतले विकृतंकार सत्यपाताल वेदिनी नमः शिवे शिवे शांति शांति निर्वाण भोचले स्वापन संयुक्ते महापातक नाशिनी नमः प्रमुदितापत् त्रिपुगात प्रवेदिनी दशक्षर पद्मासी विद्यावंकार दीपते नमस्तारे तुरे पादघात ओंकार बीजिते मेरु मंदर कैलाश भुवन त्रैचारिणी नमस्म सुरासुर सकार हरिनाम प्रस्थिते तारादविर्भट्टार्य शेष विष्णाष्टमी नमः सुरासुर गणेश पुनः सेविते आवद मोदिता भोग करी स्वप्न नाशनी नमश्चंद्राक संपूर्ण नयन द्विति भास्वरे अद्विरुक्तारे विषम ज्वर नाशिनी नमस्त्री तत्व विन्यास शिव शक्ति समन्वित ग्रह वेतालो यशस्म नाशिनी प्रवरे थूरे मंत्र मूल वेदन स्तोत्र नमस्कार विंशति पठेत प्रातः मानदेव्या भक्ति समन्विते साङ्गवापात स्मरेत सर्वाभय प्रदम सर्वपाप प्रशमनं सर्वदुर्गति नाशनम अभिषिक्तो भवेत् तुर्णं सप्तभिर्जिन कोटि बीयमासमात्रेण चैवास सुखं बालपदं भजेत विषं तस्य महाघोरं स्थावरं चाप जङ्गमं स्मरणान पदं याति कादितं पीतमेवाग्रजाल विशाखा नाम स्त्री विष्णाशनम् अन्येषामचर सत्त्वानाम द्विसप्तं विवर्तितं पुत्रकामो लभेद पुत्रं धनकामो लभेद नम सर्वकामानवाप्नोति न विज्ञेय प्रतिहन्यते इति श्रीसन्नबुद्धवैरोचन भाषितं भगवतार्य तारा देव्या नमस्कार एकविंशति नाम अष्टोदशकं बुद्ध भाषितं परिसमाप्तं. Can recite the Heart Sutra. Heart Sutra is on page number. Yeah. Okay. So. Page number 16, is it? Page number 5. Sanskrit, that's Sanskrit. And yeah, transliterated in English. You can, if you want the English version, it's on page number 16. The Sanskrit version on 5, yeah. So I'll just recite the Sanskrit version. नमः सर्वज्ञाय एवं मैं श्रुतमेकस्मिन् समय भगवान् राजगृहे विहरति स्म रुद्रकूटे पर्वते महता भिक्षुसङ्गेन साधर्ममहता च बोधिसत्त्वसङ्गेन तेन खलु समयेन भगवान् गम्भीरावसम्बोधं नाम समाधिं समापन्नः तेन च समयेन आर्यवृत्तेषु बोधिसत्त्वः सत्त्वगम्भीरायां प्रज्ञापारमितायां चर्यां चरमान् एवं व्योलोकयति स्म पञ्चस्कन्धास्तां च स्वभावशून्यं व्योलोकयति अतः आयुष्मान शारिपुत्र बुद्धानुभावेन आर्यवृत्तेश्वरं बोधिसत्त्वमेतद्घोषति कश्चिन् कुलपुत्र गम्भीरायां प्रज्ञापारमितायां चर्यां चतुकाम कथं शिक्षितव्य एवं मुक्ते आर्यवृत्तेश्वर बोधिसत्त्वः सत्त्व आयुष्मन्तं शारिपुत्रमेतद्घोषति कश्चिन् शारिपुत्र कुलपुत्र वा कुलदुहितावस्याम गम्भीरायां प्रज्ञापारमितायां चर्यां चतुकाम तेनैव व्योलोकितव्य पञ्चस्कन्धास्तां च स्वशून्यान् समनुपश्यति स्म रूपं शून्यता शून्यतैव रूपं रूपान् पृथक् शून्यता शून्यतान् पृथक् Rupam, Yad Rupam Ya Shunyata, Sa Shunyata, Ya Rudra, Ya Shunyata, Tad Rupam, Evam Vedna Sanya Sanskara Vidyanani Cha Shunyata, Evam Shariputra Sarva Dharma Shunyata, Lakshmana Tannani Ruttam Lavidana Nasashuna. तस्मात् तरिशारुपुत्र शून्यतां न रूपं न वेदना न संज्ञा न संस्कार न विज्ञानं न चक्षुः न श्रोत्रं न घ्राणं न जीवा न कायो न मनो न रूपं न शब्दो न गन्धो न रसो न स्पर्शव्यं न धर्म न चक्षुर्धातुर्यावन्न न धातुर्न धातुर्न मन विज्ञान धातु न विद्या न क्षेयावन्न न जरामरणं न जरामरणक्षय न दुःखसमुदय निरोध मार्गान् ज्ञानं न प्राप्तिर् तस्मात् तरिशारुपुत्र प्राप्तित्वेन बोधिसत्त्वानां प्रज्ञापारमिताश्च विहरति चित्तावर्ण चित्तावन्नास्तित्वात् ह्रस्तो विपर्यासति कान्तनिष्ठनिर्वाण प्रयद्भवे स्थिता सर्वबुद्धा प्रज्ञापारमिताश्चित्यानुत्तराम समय संबोधिमपि सम्बुद्धाः तस्मादन्यात्तव्ये प्रज्ञापारमिता मामन्त्रनुत्तरमन्त्र समसममन्त्र सर्वदुःखप्रशमनानन्तर सत्यमित्यद्वाद प्रज्ञापारमिता मुक्तिमन्त्र तत्तागते गते पारसंगते बोधि स्वाहा एवं शारिपुत्रो गम्भीरायाम प्रज्ञापारमितायाम चर्यायाम शिक्षितव्यं बोधिसत्त्वेन तपति भगवान् तस्मात् समाधेर्वित्तेश्वरस्य बोधिसत्त्वस्य साधुकारणदायक साधुकुलपुत्र एवं मे तत् कुलपुत्र एवं मे तत् गम्भीरायाम प्रज्ञापारमितायाम चर्यां चर्तव्ये यथा त्वया निर्दिष्टमनुमोद्यते तदा गतिर्हद्भिदमोच भगवान् आनन्दमनाश्यमान शारिपुत्र आर्यावृत्तेश्वरश्च बोधिसत्त्वसाक्ष सर्वावति परिषत् सर्वे मानुषसूरगन्धर्वश्च लोको भवतु भाषितमभिनन्दनीति प्रज्ञापारमिता हृदयसूत्रं समाप्तम्. Okay, so let's now start our discussion on the text proper. Yeah. So as we were just reflecting while we were setting the motivation for the session, our present human form is characterized by the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments, and I briefly explained what those 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments are. So there are 4 freedoms that are in the nature of freedom from the unfavorable conditions that we could experience if we were reborn as non-humans, and 4 that pertain to unfavorable conditions in human life itself. So just think about how fortunate we are that not only are we born as humans, we are born in a place where spirituality is still alive, thriving. The doctrine is still being practiced. We could be born as humans, but in places where there's perpetual conflict. Just think about places like Syria or Iraq. There's just no scope for thinking about anything beyond mere survival. Just think about the fact that we have temporary kind of illnesses and ailments, but nothing major, and we have adequate intelligence to be able to study the texts, the sutras, and analyze them, and we generally do not have any kind of wrong views. We do have faith in the law of karma and the other essential teachings of the Buddhist doctrine. So we have all these 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments, and as the text described, I mean, it's very rare to be born as humans, and it's even rare to actually have human rebirth with these freedoms and endowments. As I said, even being born as humans, you could be born in a place where you're not deprived of any kind of material conditions. You're prosperous, you're affluent, but you could be completely cut off from Dharma. So we could probably consider ourselves to be in the top 1 percentile of the human population in terms of the fortune that we have because of these freedoms and the endowments that we have. So think about these 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments. And when talking about the preciousness of human rebirth, it's said in the text that human rebirth, human form, is even more precious than the forms that one gets if you're born in one of the god realms. So even gods, when it's time for a deity or a god to kind of, it's time for him to pass on to some other rebirth, then the gods kind of wish them have a happy rebirth. And by a happy rebirth, they mean that you have a human rebirth. Because even as a god, they aspire for human rebirth because of the unique kind of properties or the characteristics that a human form is endowed with. We call this human form Vajra form, a Vajra body. And why is it? Because it is suitable for a very unique kind of practice, which is the practice of Vajrayana. So, for you to be able to practice Vajrayana, you need to have a human form. Even high ground bodhisattvas who were born in Buddha fields like Sukhavati and Abhirati, even there, they're not able to practice Vajrayana. They aspire for human rebirth if they want to practice human form. And if they want to practice Vajrayana, and they seek rebirth in the human form. So, it's because of all these kind of characteristics, human form is considered to be very rare and very precious. And it's very difficult to obtain, as we just saw. We have been looking at this example of the turtle. If somebody is good at mathematics, Shanti might be able to calculate the probability of what would be the probability of the turtle being able to poke its neck through a yolk floating on the surface of the ocean. Would be pretty low. But human form is considered to be even more improbable than that. Yeah. So think about how precious the human form is and how rare it is, how difficult it is to obtain a human form. It is difficult to obtain because of all the unique conditions that we need to, unique causes that we need to create to be born as humans. The extremely high levels of morality that one needs to engage in, the ethical discipline that one needs to practice, the extensive prayers that one has to set into motion, and all the kinds of paramitas that we need to kind of practice to accumulate the necessary amount of merit to be born as humans. But this human form is also very, although characterized with the by the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments, it's also very easy to be deprived of this 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments. The human form is also quite fragile, and there are many more factors in our environment that can shorten our lives, take away our lives, take away our life force. And with our life force, you'd lose that, those 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments. And you lose those 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments in this lifetime, and then it becomes impossible or near impossible to get a human rebirth again characterized by the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments. So precious it is, rare it is, and again very difficult to obtain if you lose it. So we need to be constantly aware of these things, the preciousness of human rebirth, the rarity of human rebirth, and the fact that it is difficult to obtain it again. So that having said, because we are not aware of these qualities that characterize our existence, and even if we are aware, that aware is not kind of there, it's not deep-seated in our thinking. We tend to kind of engage in wasteful activities. We tend to engage in a lot of meaningless activities in our lifetime. So we need to be constantly aware of this fortune that we've been endowed with, and make sure that we do not end up wasting this fortune by engaging in meaningless affairs of this life. There's a very nice verse by Kadampa master called Kundan Rinpoche. He's composed a nice verse which kind of describes most of our lives, at least my life. He says that he says need to practice dharma, not recalling thus 20 went by, 20 years went by. So he says need to do dharma, not recalling thus 20 years went by. Will do, suggesting thus 20 went by. Could not, regretting thus remaining 10 went by. Squandered, a lifetime bare. Thus goes the story of my life. So that is the story of my life too. So it's we are so careless with this fortune that we've been endowed with, whereas we should be constantly aware of the of all these endowments and freedoms that we have, and make sure that we deploy them in a manner that we're able to extract the most essence of this life that we've been provided with. And what is the best way to extract the most essence out of this life? What will make our lives most meaningful, as we just saw in our short meditation, set motivation for this session. The best way to extract this most essence out of this life is to aspire for complete enlightenment. So complete Buddhahood should be the goal that describes all the activities in our life. So in order to attain Buddhahood, you need to start by cultivating the mind of enlightenment, or bodhicitta. And bodhicitta, as you know, is rooted in the practice of great compassion for its cause, and the wish to serve, work for others' welfare as its purpose. So great compassion is the root cause for bodhicitta. And great compassion, in order to cultivate great compassion, you need to be aware about the suffering nature of the samsara. You need to be aware of the general and the specific kinds of sufferings that characterize the samsara. You need to be aware of the suffering that all sentient beings experience. But in order for you to be aware of the suffering that other sentient beings experience, you need to be aware of the suffering that you yourself experience. And you need to realize the suffering nature of your own existence. And when you have a proper understanding and you have a proper realization of the suffering nature of your own existence, you are able to cultivate this attitude of renunciation, because you see samsara in the nature of suffering, and you then develop a wish to be freed from that suffering nature. That's when you are supposed to have cultivated the attitude of renunciation. So renunciation then kind of becomes the root for your practice of compassion. Compassion becomes the root for your practice of bodhicitta, and bodhicitta then leads to the attainment of complete enlightenment. So renunciation, you need to have awareness of your own suffering, and that then helps you realize the suffering nature of others' existence. So for renunciation, when you talk about recognition of your own suffering, and then your wish to be free from the suffering of samsara in general, and you also, before you do that, you generate a wish to be free from suffering of this lifetime. So you start by renouncing the pleasures of this lifetime. So that is the starting point. And then when you renounce the pleasures of this lifetime, you aspire for a higher birth in your next lifetime. At the least, if you're a spiritual practitioner, that's the goal that you should have. So that is the goal that characterizes the trainee on the low scope training path. The person who aspires for liberation is a person on the medium scope path, and a person who aspires for complete enlightenment is the higher training, is the trainee on the higher training path. So these are the three levels of training that we need to engage in, and the graduated path towards enlightenment of the Lamrim text is a presentation of these three paths: the lower scope training, the medium scope training, and the higher scope training. And it specifically talks about three different gateways to open spiritual doors. It talks about renunciation. It talks about refuge, the gateway for a trainee on the lower scope. It talks about renunciation as a gateway for a trainee on the medium scope. And it talks about bodhicitta as the gateway for a trainee practicing the Mahayana path. It is the sole gateway to the Mahayana paths. And those three gateways also need to be combined with the practice of right view. So the Lamrim text is a presentation of these three gateways and the practice of the right view. And all these things, all these practices are kind of presented in this text, the three principal aspects of the path in a very condensed manner. But it's essentially the Lamrim text. It's condensed in 14 verses. And I have circulated a small outline of the text. Do you have it stable?
It's on the third of fourth.
Okay.
No, not third of fourth. It's in the middle of fourth. After the third.
Okay, yeah. So the three principal aspects of the path, this one, you see it? Okay, so I'll just go through the outline of the text before we proceed to examining the verses individually. So there are three parts to the text. There's the part that deals with the preliminaries. So usually in the Tibetan tradition, any composition begins with these preliminaries. There's a homage verse, and then there's a pledge to compose, which states the purpose for composing the text. And there's some sort of an advice exhorting the disciples who are the beneficiaries of that text, who the text is composed for, exhorting them to listen attentively to the text. So that's the first section, the preliminaries part. Then there's the actual body of the text. The actual body of the text here has three parts to it. The first part is renunciation. The second part deals with bodhicitta. And the third part deals with the practices pertaining to the cultivation of the right view. So the first part, renunciation, it has three sections to it. What is the purpose? Why should one generate renunciation? And how does one generate renunciation? And what are the indicators of having generated renunciation? So these are the three sections that the section on renunciation deals with. And the second part, how to generate renunciation, has two parts to it. How to generate renunciation that reverses attraction to the appearances of present life, and how to generate renunciation that reverses attraction to the appearances of future lives. So that is the section that deals with renunciation. And similarly for bodhicitta, there are three parts. First deals with the purpose of generating the mind of enlightenment. And the second one deals with the steps or the process of generating the mind of enlightenment. And the third one deals with what are the indicators of having attained the mind of enlightenment. And the third section, the section on the right view, also has a similar kind of breakup. The first one talks about why one must meditate on the right view. Second section deals with how to ascertain the right view. The third one talks about an indicator of having completed the analysis of the right view, and an indicator of not having completed the analysis of the right view. And then there's a special section on the uncommon attributes of the prasangika view, the prasangika madhyamaka. And then there's a fourth part in the actual body of the text section, having ascertained the view, advised to strive unwaveringly to realize the view. And then the last verse in this text, the 14th verse, deals with this third part, exhorting the disciples to practice, to endure this. Advice prospers into completion. It's completion of the state, completion of this entire part. So, exhorting the disciples to practice without break, continuing the practice with perseverance, and how the advice would then prosper into completion of his goals. So,
Available, this outline is by J. Rinpoche himself.
This is an outline that commentators use. So the present outline, I'm actually referring to a text commentary by Samdar Rinpoche. So this outline is actually what he's presented in his commentary. But this is also the outline that you'll find more or less in the text that we are using. This is from FPMT's booklet. This one. Yeah. Okay, so this is the outline of the text. So let's just go through the text now. So the first, before the first verse begins, there's a line of homage. It says, homage to the most venerable teachers. So there are other English translations. In the other English translations, it says, I bow down to my perfect gurus. So, as I said, in the Tibetan tradition, when you begin composing any text, you begin the composition with the homage, where the homage actually comprises of words of auspiciousness. So it's also called Mangala Charan. There's also prostrations and advice on what the substance of the text is. So a brief advice on what the substance of the text will be. And typically, either of these three are present in the homage verse. So here you will find that the homage is essentially in the nature of prostrations. So I bow down to my perfect gurus. In Tibetan, it says, Jitsun Lama Chatselos. Chatselo actually means prostrate. I prostrate to the Jitsun Lama. So Jitsun Lama actually has three elements to it. There's a word called Je, Tsun, and Lama. And each of these words kind of indicate three different parts of the Buddhist doctrine. So Je refers to the Vinaya part, Tsun refers to the Sutra part, and Tantra is referred by the Lama part. So I make prostrations to Je Tsun Lama. So I'm making prostrations to the Vinaya, to the Sutra, and the Tantra that the Buddha taught. So this verse, homage to the most venerable teachers, here there's it reveals an object of homage, and it also there's a direct revelation in this text in this line, and there's an implicit kind of revelation. So what is the direct revelation here? It reveals the lineage of gurus that the author of the text is making prostrations to. So the direct lineage here is actually the lineage that comes from Shakyamuni Buddha to Arya Manjushri, from Arya Manjushri to Nagarjuna, and all the wisdom lineage practitioners, all the way down to Dharma Tsongkhapa's root teacher. So that is the direct lineage. And then the indirect, so this is the wisdom lineage, the direct wisdom lineage. And then there's the indirect lineage, or the profound lineage. So Shakyamuni Buddha, Arya Maitreya, Buddha Maitreya, from Buddha Maitreya to Asanga, and all the way to the root Lama of Lama Tsongkhapa. So these are the two lineages that Lama Tsongkhapa is making prostrations to. So this is the object of the homage verse. And the purpose of offering the homage is, again, there's a immediate purpose and there's an indirect ultimate purpose. So the immediate purpose is so that all obstacles, all immediate obstacles to the composition of the text be removed. And the ultimate purpose, of course, is that it leads to the actualization of the path to Buddhahood. So the verse reveals the immediate purpose as well as the ultimate purpose. And how is the homage being paid? As I said, it's in the nature of prostrations. So prostrations to the Jetsun Lama or to Vinaya Sutra and Tantra. And prostrations, again, there are three different kinds of prostrations. One kind of prostration is very common. We see in amongst Indians, we go and touch the feet of our gurus. So that's what we are prostrating to the gurus. The second one is to do a complete shashtang, as you say, lie down on the floor and all the entire body is in touch with the ground, and you make prostration to the guru. And then there's a prostration which is where 5 major points on your body touch the ground. So 5 limbs, 5 elements of your body touch the ground. So so this is the physical prostration, but here it's mental. And what the prostration here actually implies, you're actually prostrating to the qualities that you consider your guru is endowed with. And why do you do that? You prostrate so that those qualities can then arise and prosper in your own mind stream. So that's the purpose why you make prostration. So prostration actually is expressing a desire to attain the qualities that abide in the mind stream of your guru. So here the guru, as I said, there's the direct lineage and then the indirect lineage. And Lama Tsongkhapa is making prostrations to the direct lineage gurus and the indirect lineage gurus, so that their qualities, all their qualities abide in their mind stream. The virtuous qualities that abide in the mind stream are not transformed, they are kind of are born, they arise in his own mind stream and then prosper and flourish in his mind stream. And that's the reason why one makes prostrations. So the homage verse also has an implied teaching. As the direct revelation is this lineages and the prostrations that the author is making, and the indirect revelation is the teaching on how to engage in the practice of relying on a spiritual guru to advance your spiritual practice. So that is the implied revelation in this verse, homage to the most venerable teachers. So this verse reveals the way to rely on a spiritual guide to advance your spiritual practice. And Lama Tsongkhapa was very particular that your spiritual practice has to be rooted in this practice of reliance on a spiritual guide. That becomes the foundation on which we can build your other practices. The other practices, the other practitioners of the Kadampa lineage, they would, when they put an order to the kind of practices that you do, reliance on a spiritual guide would come much lower down the order. But with Lama Tsongkhapa, he was very particular that that is the root of your spiritual practice, and only on the basis of reliance on the spiritual guide can your spiritual practice advance. So this is the homage verse, homage to the most venerable teachers. And then the first verse is the promise or the pledge to compose. It's stating the purpose of composing the text. So it says, I shall explain here to the best of my ability the essential points of all the scriptures of the conqueror, the path acclaimed by all excellent bodhisattvas, the gateway for the fortunate ones aspiring for liberation. Okay, so the FPMT text has a slightly different translation, essentially the same. I also read the FPMT translation. This is the translation that Lama Zopa Rinpoche himself had done. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche's translation says, the essential meaning of the victorious one's teachings, the path praised by all the holy victors and their children, the gateway of the fortunate ones desiring liberation. This I shall try to explain as much as I can. So this verse, which states the purpose of composing the text, there are 4 lines here, as you can notice. The first line actually explicitly states the pledge or the promise to compose this text. And the following 3 lines in the text that you have, the first line talks about, it actually indicates, describes the practice of renunciation. The second line describes the practice of bodhicitta. And the third line, the gateway of the fortunate ones desiring liberation, that indicates the practice of cultivation of right view. So renunciation, bodhicitta, and the practice of right view. That is what is being described in these lines here. So as the first line, I shall explain here to the best of my ability, is the line that which explicitly states the purpose of composing the text. Why is it done? So that there is perfect fulfillment of the composition. The second line, the essential points of all the scriptures of the conquerors. So conquerors, or as Lama Zopa's translation says, victorious ones. Why is this word being used? Conquers. What has the person conquered to be called the conqueror? So the person has conquered all afflictions and all obscurations. So all the afflictive obscurations and the cognitive obscurations. And that's the reason why the person is called a conqueror. And then the essential points of the scriptures. Actually, in the Tibetan text, this word scripture actually has a slightly deeper meaning. The word in Tibetan is sungrab. So sung actually means speech, and rab means supreme, or it has the connotation of being something that is, it indicates speech that is thoroughly beneficial to the disciples towards whom the speech is targeted. So sungrab, sung, when you translate it in Sanskrit, it means pravachan. So pravachan, again, as you notice, there's the main word vachan, and there's a prefix called pra. So vachan implies speech, exalted speech here. And pra, actually, the prefix is used in different ways. And here specifically, what it implies is valid speech, or valid or speech by a person who is considered to be a valid cognizer, valid cognition, or a person, or the speech from a person who has conquered both kinds of obscurations. So valid speech, valid because the conqueror directly perceives all the phenomena, and through that knowledge of all phenomena through direct perception, he preaches the speech to disciples who are all kinds of spiritual maturity, all kinds of dispositions. So he uses his knowledge about this person's spiritual disposition and his spiritual maturity, and he teaches him accordingly. So this word, word teaching, or the word scripture, has a more deeper meaning actually, if you use the Tibetan word sungra. And how does it imply the practice of renunciation? So Sungra Vachan Pravachan targeted some disciples. So, who are these disciples? Disciples who practice renunciation as their entry point, as their essential practice to advance on the spiritual path. So, the verse, the second line, the essential points of all the scriptures of the conquerors, it kind of indicates the practice of renunciation. Because the Buddha said that the practice of renunciation is the foundation practice of the Buddhist path. So the point, the word essential point here, what describes the essence of the Buddhist path? It is the practice of renunciation. What is essential to advance on the Buddhist path? It is renunciation. So that's how this line in this verse, the essential points of all the scriptures of the conqueror, that indicates the practice of renunciation. And then the second line, the third line rather, the path acclaimed by all excellent bodhisattvas. So this indicates the practice of bodhicitta. So what is the path that is acclaimed by excellent bodhisattvas? It is the practice of that cultivates the mind of enlightenment. So this is the path acclaimed by all the excellent bodhisattvas, and the gateway for the fortunate ones aspiring for liberation. So this line, the gateway of the fortunate ones aspiring for liberation, it indicates the pathway that the intelligent ones, the more qualified spiritual practitioners, the pathway that they tread in order to attain the goal of liberation. And that pathway is the pathway of right view. That pathway is the pathway of insight, wisdom. So that wisdom is critical. It is essential for you to advance your practice of renunciation and bodhicitta, so that it can translate into liberation. So without that practice of the right view, just mere renunciation of bodhicitta will not yield liberation or Buddhahood. So that's how the this line, the gateway for the fortunate ones aspiring for liberation, it implies the instructions on the practice of right view. So this first verse itself is kind of presenting the three essential practices that are being elaborated in this text: the practice of renunciation, the practice of bodhicitta, and the practice of right view. So after that comes the so the first verse then says that I'll elaborate on the essential points of the practice of renunciation, bodhicitta, and the practice of right view to the best of my ability. I'll try and elaborate it in this text. So that is the verse pledging to compose this text. Then comes the verse which persuades the appropriate, the suitable vessels appropriate for this teaching, suitable for this teaching, persuade them to listen attentively to this teaching. So what does the verse say? It says, those who are not attached to the joys of cyclic existence, who strive to make meaningful this life of leisure and opportunity, and who place their trust in the path that pleases the conquerors, O fortunate ones, listen with an open heart. So again, here too, the first line presents renunciation, those who are not attached to the joys of the cyclic existence. So those who have renounced the pleasures of cyclic existence, they are the people who are practicing renunciation. So the first line presents the practice of renunciation, who strive to make meaningful this life of leisure and opportunity. So as how do you make this life of freedoms and endowments meaningful? It's by aspiring for complete enlightenment, for the purpose of benefiting other sentient beings. So this line, who strive to make meaningful this life of leisure and opportunity, indicates the practice of bodhicitta, and who place their trust in the path that pleases the conquerors. So, what is the path that pleases the conquerors? It is the path that helps you practice the right view. Why does it please the conquerors? Because it is the foundational practice that can lead you lead you to liberation from the samsara, or it can lead you to complete enlightenment. So that's the unique path that the conquerors have preached, and that is the hard intent of the many teachings that the conquerors have preached, and that's the reason a person who is practicing that path, the path of right view, that pleases the conquerors, and who place their trust in the path that pleases the conquerors, or fortunate ones, listen with an open heart. So the author is exhorting these kind of individuals, these kind of practitioners who are not attached, who have cultivated renunciation, who have cultivated some kind of bodhicitta, who have entrusted themselves to the practice of right view. These are the suitable, appropriate kind of vessels for the practice.
They are basically Mahayana practitioners.
Yes, they are Mahayana practitioners. Yeah. So the author is exhorting them to listen attentively to this teaching. So that's the second verse. Then the third verse, this is where the actual body of the text begins. So this from here till the sixth verse is the presentation on renunciation. Then from the seventh verse onwards, from the sixth verse onwards, is the presentation on enlightenment, the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta. So till the fifth verse is the presentation on renunciation. So the third verse, without pure renunciation, there is no means to pacify the yearning for joys and fruits of samsaric ocean. And as craving for existence chain us thoroughly, at first, search for true renunciation. So I'll also read the translation from the FPMT text. Without the complete intention, definitely to be free from circling, there is no way to pacify attachment, seeking pleasurable effects in the ocean of circling. Also, by craving for cyclic existence, embodied beings are continuously bound. Therefore, at the very beginning, seek renunciation. So it's essentially the same, just a slight difference in the wording. So, without pure renunciation, there is no means to pacify the yearning for the joys and fruits of samsaric ocean. So, without pure renunciation, here, if you see pure renunciation, renunciation is qualified by the word pure. So, it's kind of indicating that there's another kind of renunciation also. There's a renunciation that is not so pure. So this line here actually indicates two kinds of renunciations. There's a flawed renunciation and there's a flawless renunciation. So without flawless renunciation, it is not possible for us to pacify the grasping at the pleasures of samsara. So what is this flawless renunciation, and what makes a renunciation either flawed or flawless? So flawless renunciation results if you cultivate a proper understanding of the first two truths of the Four Noble Truths. So the first two truths are the truth of suffering and the truth of the sources of suffering. So if you cultivate renunciation merely on the basis of the recognition and realization of the first truth, which is the truth of suffering. So let's say you realize that there's a lot of suffering in samsara, essentially physical in nature, illnesses and all that. And also the second kind of suffering, which is the suffering of change. So any kind of pleasure that you experience in samsara, any kind of pleasure that you experience in the desire realm, or the pleasure that gods experience in the god realms, in the form realms and the formless realms. These pleasures, they're contaminated in the sense they are subject to change, and they will change eventually into suffering. So these kind of suffering, the first two kinds of suffering, the suffering of change and the suffering of suffering, if you merely realize these two sufferings, and you cultivate an attitude of renunciation based on revulsion towards these kind of experiences, which you realize are in the nature of suffering, either in the nature of suffering or suffering of change. That kind of renunciation is not a flawless renunciation. It's a flawed renunciation because it is unstable. It can change when it encounters other conditions. It's very temporary. It's fleeting. So if we cultivate that kind of renunciation, then it's not considered to be flawless renunciation. Even non-Buddhist practitioners have this kind of renunciation. There are non-Buddhist practitioners who practice advanced samadhis and attain rebirths in the higher planes, in the form realm and in the formless realms through the practice of dhyanas. That is merely through the realization of the suffering of change. But as I said, that renunciation based on the recognition of just these two forms of suffering is not flawless. It is not pure. So what is pure renunciation? Pure renunciation requires you to recognize the first two truths, the truth of sources of suffering as well as the truth of suffering. So if you realize the sources, the truth of the sources of suffering, then you realize that why we suffer in samsara is because of the forces of karma and affliction. So you create all kinds of negative karma because of that negative karma. You get impelled. There's impelling karma that propels you to new rebirths, and you meet all kinds of unfavorable conditions through completion karma in those rebirths. So karma brings all the suffering, but karma again is created because of the force of afflictions, and the most important affliction is the affliction of ignorance. So recollect your discussion of the 12 links of dependent origination, and it tells you that the root of samsara is avidya, or ignorance. So ignorance, that leads to karma, and then that leads to consciousness, and then the other 9 links follow. So the 12 links of dependent origination talk about the afflictions of craving, ignorance, craving, and grasping, being the afflictions that create the karma that propels you into new rebirths. So one needs to have an understanding of those aspects of the teaching. So in order for you to have a complete understanding of the 12 links of dependent origination, you need to understand not just the truth of suffering, but you also need to understand the truth of the sources of suffering. And not just that, one needs to also have a perspective on what actually can lead you out of those sufferings. So you need to have some appreciation of the truth of the paths. So a person who has flawless renunciation has a recognition of all this. He has a recognition of the truth of suffering, the truth of the sources of suffering, and also the truth of the paths. So that's how one develops flawless renunciation. So a person with pure renunciation or flawless renunciation, without flawless renunciation, there's no means to pacify the yearnings for the joys and the fruits of samsaric ocean. So what are the joys and fruits of samsaric ocean? It's not just the physical sensation of pleasure. What is more powerful than the physical sensations that we experience, the physical sensations of pleasure, are the mental sensations that are induced by these physical sensations. So it's the fruits that are being referred to here are actually these mental sensations of pleasure that are induced by the physical pleasant sensations. So it is those mental sensations that we need to be aware of. And why do those mental sensations arise? It's because we crave for those kind of sensations. So craving is the affliction that is being, again, in the line, in the third line, that's the affliction that is being referred to as craving for existence chains us thoroughly to samsara. In order to arrest that craving, what do we need to do? We need to cultivate this attitude of true renunciation. So we need to have an understanding of the true suffering, the true sources, the truth of the sources of suffering, and also the truth of the paths. So on the basis of an understanding of those three truths, we can arrest this craving, which induces, which creates the forces that can propel you into a rebirth, and then rebirth comes with its own suffering. So craving needs to be arrested, and craving can be arrested through cultivation of renunciation. And for this renunciation to be flawless, you need to have an understanding of the truth of suffering, the truth of sources of suffering, and the truth of the paths. So that's the process that is being referred to you to here. You need to cultivate renunciation, on the basis of which you then can work towards liberation. So renunciation becomes the foundation. So that's the third verse, and then the fourth verse. The fourth verse actually talks about how to generate renunciation. So the fourth verse actually has two parts to it. The first part talks about how to generate renunciation that reverses attraction to the appearances of current life. So that's the first step. You need to generate renunciation, and it happens sequentially. You need to generate renunciation for the pleasures of this life, and then you need to generate renunciation for samsara in general, for future lives also. So the this verse, how to generate renunciation, it talks about how to generate renunciation that reverses attractions to the appearances of present life, and then it talks about how to generate renunciation that reverses attraction to future lives. So the verse, the first part of the verse, by cultivating in mind that this human life is so hard to find, yet has no time to spare, preoccupations with this life will cease. So preoccupations with this life will cease. So this part talks about how to generate renunciation that reverses attraction to the appearances of the present life. And then by contemplating repeatedly the truth of karma and suffering, preoccupations with next life will come to cease. So this is the part that talks about how to cultivate renunciation that reverses attraction to appearances of future lives. So I'll also read the verse from the FPMT translation. Freedom and endowments are difficult to find, and life has no time to spare. By gaining familiarity with this, attraction to the appearances of this life is reversed. This is the first part. And then the second part says, by thinking over and over again that actions and their effects are unbetraying, and repeatedly contemplating the miseries of cyclic existence, attraction to the appearances of future lives is reversed. So those are the verses from the FPMT translation. So by cultivating in mind that this human life is so hard to find, yet has no time to spare, preoccupations with this life will cease. So as I said, this talks about a training that reverses the attraction to the appearances of the current life. So it describes the training that is unique to the lower scope trainees. So freedom and cultivating in mind that this life, human life, is so hard to find. This human life characterized by freedoms and endowments. So we've just seen what those freedoms and endowments are. So here we can reflect on the importance of these freedoms and endowments. So we know that we're blessed with these freedoms and endowments. Yet, if we just are obsessed with avoiding, evading suffering and the happiness of just our present life, then this is what even animals engage in. This is what their actions are all about. So if we just engage in similar actions, then we are no different in the terms of our activities. We're no different than animals. So it's incumbent on us to use these freedoms and endowments in a more useful manner. And how do we do that is by cultivating aspiration for complete enlightenment. And as we had seen, this life, which is characterized by the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments, it's suitable for the practice of the Mahayana path, and it is something that is desired by even deities in the higher realms. So there's a verse in a sutra called Garbha Avakranti Sutra, or Descent into the Womb Sutra, and it what the verse says that it is indeed very difficult to attain a human form which is characterized by the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments. It is difficult to obtain these this kind of conditions in million eons. So that's the kind of time scale that the sutra talks about, and it says that even.
Yeah, the thing is in this, particular line, yet has no time to spare. What does this signify? Because even if I take it out, and the sutra should still make sense, because by cultivating in mind that this human life is so hard to find, the occupations with the life will cease.
Yeah. So it actually talks about, okay, the first part talks about the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments. And then the second part says it is so hard to find, so difficult to obtain. So these 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments are very hard to find, difficult to obtain. And the third part, yet has no time to spare, actually is talking about the fact that you can be separated from those 8 freedoms and 10 endowments anytime. Life has no time to spare for you. It's talking about termination of life. It's talking about factors that can take away those 8 freedoms and 10 endowments. So it's talking about death, actually. It's talking about inevitability of death. It's talking about how uncertain death is. Yeah. So it's talking about those aspects. Yeah. So I'll come to that. So okay. So the 8 freedoms and 10 endowments, as that characterize our present existence, they make this life appropriate for us to realize our immediate as well as our final ultimate goals. So immediate goal is to ensure that we do not suffer too much. We can use these 8 freedoms and endowments to ensure that even in the future, our lives are blessed with 8 freedoms and 10 endowments. And our ultimate goals would be to attain Buddhahood. But how do we do that? By ensuring that we practice ethical discipline, by ensuring that we practice compassion, by ensuring that we practice paramitas. So all that can be done. All that is feasible because we have this human form. Without this human form, practicing those activities will be not possible. So that's why these 8 freedoms and 10 endowments are extremely important. And they are difficult to attain. We'd seen in our previous session when we discussed the 150 verses praised by Ashwa Ghosh. In that verse, in that text also, he made a reference to how difficult human life is to obtain through this example of the turtle. The turtle is quite famous. So when he finds a reference in a lot of teachings, 150 verses. And then even in Bodhicharya Avatara, this turtle makes a reference, appearance. So in Bodhicharya Avatara, Shanti Deva says, Ata eva Bhagavan Manushyan Ati Durlabham. So it says that getting a human life is extremely rare. And how rare is it? Maha Arnava Yug. Maha Arnava Yuga Chidra Kurma Griva Arpanopanam. So Maha Arnava is talking about a great ocean. Yoga is actually a yoke. Chidra is the aperture of the yoke, and Kurma is actually a turtle, and Griva is his neck. And it's talking about the probability of the turtle being able to poke its neck through the aperture of the ring, which is thrown about either and treated by the waves of the ocean, massive ocean, enormous ocean, vast ocean. The turtle also makes an appearance in Nagarjuna's text called a friendly letter or Sur Lekha. In that text, Nagarjuna says, since it is even more difficult to obtain a human life from an animal life than for a sea turtle's head to enter the aperture of a yoke floating upon the great ocean. O king, Lord of humankind, make this life fruitful by practicing the sublime teaching. So he's advising his friend, king, emperor, on how rare this human rebirth is and why it is important for him to practice the spiritual path. Okay, and then the line and yet has no time to spare, as I said, is talking about the possibility of you being separated from those eight freedoms and endowments. Life has no time to spare for you. I mean, it can't wait for you. For our tendency is that we think we have this grasping at permanence. None of us actually thinks that that is not inevitable. We know that that is inevitable. Our grasping at permanence is not in that sense, but we do grasp at this attitude that death will not come today. So, we all of us think that we'll die, but maybe at a certain time in the future. Yeah, even a person who is on his deathbed, is extremely sick, he's talking to his friends and relatives, and even he has the back of his mind the thought that maybe I'll die, but tomorrow or day after, not now. So in that sense, we grasp at permanence. We grasp at permanence of this form. So, but life has no time to spare for these kind of thoughts. Death is inevitable. Yeah, and that is inevitable because lifespan is fixed. It is that is life is propelled by karmic forces, and whatever karmic forces set this life into motion, it came with a specific kind of definite validity. So once that validity expires, exhausts, then we're gone. We don't have this the life force and the eight freedoms and the 10 endowments that characterize it. So we need to think about that, the inevitability of that. We think about how we cannot escape our ultimate embrace with the Lord of Death, Yama. We kind of getting with every passing moment, we're going closer towards that embrace. Lifespan is fixed. It's not being added to. There's only depletion of our lifespan, and then because this is the truth of our existence, and because we do not invest too much in contemplating about how rare these eight freedoms and 10 endowments are, we do not spend time in practicing the Dharma. So we'll ultimately kind of die before we'll get around to practicing Dharma. So that is what is being referred to here as no time to spare. And then it also talks about the fact that when death will come is uncertain. So births in this form on this continent, it's called Jambu Dweep. We come with a specific kind of lifespan, 100 years maybe. But we know 100 years is the average lifespan, but when these 100 years we die, that is uncertain. So, and why is it uncertain? Because the environment that we abide in has more factors that could terminate our life, take away our life force. There are fewer environmental factors that contribute to strengthening the life force or protecting it. And the other reason that the time of death is uncertain is because our human forms are extremely fragile. So we need to kind of reflect on all these things. And then we also need to kind of reflect on the fact that at the time of death, wealth is not going to help us. Friends and relatives are not going to help us. And even our bodies, we are so invested in, we kind of preserve, take so much pain to nurture and preserve this body. Even that body, at the time when it's needed, is going to kind of betray us, and we're not going to be able to avoid death. So nothing can help us at the time of death. The only friends and relatives that we can carry along with us at the point of death are our karma and the afflictions that we have. So those are our accomplices, and we need to be aware of that. And that's what is being referred to here. That because of all these characteristics that qualify our existence, there is no time to spare, and we are preoccupied with this life at the moment. We're consumed by our wish to experience the pleasures of this life. But because there's no time to spare, if we cultivate that thought, we cultivate this mindfulness of death, its inevitability, its uncertainty, and how nothing is going to help us at the time of death, then our preoccupation with this life will cease at the least. Yeah. So that will reverse our attraction to the appearances of this life. So that is the starting point of cultivating renunciation. It's an aspect of renunciation, but it's still not complete renunciation. When does renunciation become complete? When you abandon attraction to the appearances of the future lives also. So that is the second part of this verse. By contemplating repeatedly the truth of karma and samsaric suffering, preoccupations with next life will come to cease. So, by cultivating in mind, by contemplating repeatedly the truth of karma and samsaric suffering, preoccupations with next life will come to cease. So, contemplating repeatedly the truth of karma. So, this is actually talking about training that is specific, that is common to the training of the middle scope as well as the lower scope training. And contemplating samsaric suffering is actually a training that is common to the trainees on the middle scope path. So here in this line, there's a reference to both the middle scope as well as the lower scope training. So you reflect on karma, how wholesome actions can bring you happiness, how unwholesome actions can bring you suffering. And then you also kind of reflect on the suffering nature of samsara. So you talk about, you reflect on the general nature of its suffering, of samsara, and you also reflect on the specific kinds of suffering that characterizes your existence in the 5 different kinds of realms, in the hell realm, in the hungry ghost realms, in the animal realm, in the human realm, and in the God's realms. And also, you talk about the general suffering that characterizes samsaric existence. So before you understand, you reflect on the samsaric suffering, you need to have an understanding of how karma operates and how karma actually leads to the suffering. Suffering here, as I said, you need to reflect on the general nature of samsaric suffering. The general nature of samsaric suffering, when you reflect on the general nature of suffering, samsaric suffering, you think about the 3 kinds of suffering, or you also can reflect on the 8 different kinds of suffering. So from your discussion on suffering from the Discovering Buddhism course, you probably are aware of this classification. So the 3 different kinds of, when you talk about the 3 types of suffering, you're talking about suffering of suffering, suffering of change, and the all-pervasive conditioned suffering. So suffering of suffering is what we experience normally in the form of physical pain, illnesses, headaches. That kind of suffering is the suffering of suffering. And suffering of change is all kinds of contaminated pleasures that we experience in samsara. it's called, it's also suffering, because any kind of pleasure that we experience is actually just the initial phase of the next kind of suffering. So, for example, right now we are sitting cross-legged and there's pain in our knees, and there's an urge for that we desire to get up. So when you get up, you experience temporary relief from the pain that we've been experiencing. But if you extend that, prolong that, then after a while, the act of standing, instead of giving you relief and pleasure, is going to turn into suffering. So that act is actually, that experience also is suffering. What you experience as a relief is actually just the initial phase of a new kind of suffering. So that's the how we understand the suffering of change. And then we also talk about the third kind of suffering, which is the all-pervasive conditioned suffering. The fact that our existence is caused by karma and afflictions just means that suffering is just around the corner. There's no where in the samsara where we can hide, where we're going to be free from suffering. Because of karma, we've been born with this human form. For example, we have this physical and mental aggregates because of the karmic, because of the karma that we created in the past. And these psychophysical aggregates that we have are the basis of the suffering that we are experiencing right now in this lifetime. So these psychophysical aggregates are the basis for all kinds of suffering that we experience. So this all-pervasive conditioned suffering is actually a reference to this aggregates, the psychophysical aggregates that characterize our existence. And these come about because of karma and afflictions. So karma and afflictions are sovereign. You can't escape that influence. And that's the reason it says it's all-pervasive. It's all-pervasive. So these are the three kinds of suffering that characterize our existence. So you need to be aware of these three kinds of suffering. So when you reflect on this, you are reflecting on the general suffering of samsara. And when you reflect on the 8 kinds of hot hells and the cold hells and the surrounding hells and the occasional hells, you're talking about the specific suffering that characterizes the existence of the hell beings. So you need to reflect on all these specific kind of sufferings also to understand the true nature of suffering in samsara. So if you have that, then you reverse your attraction to the appearances of future lives also. So when you do that, you have cultivated what is flawless renunciation. So this is the part that deals with how to cultivate renunciation. We'll just do the 5th verse and then we will stop and do a short meditation. So the 5th verse talks about what is an indicator that you cultivated renunciation. So what is the definition of having generated renunciation, flawless renunciation? So what does the verse say? As you habituate in this way, and when not even an instant of admiration arises for the prosperities of cyclic existence, and when the thought aspiring for liberation arises day and night, at this point, true renunciation has arisen. So I'll just read the APNT translation also. When having trained in that way, there is no arising even for a moment or for a second of attraction to the perfections of cyclic existence, and all day and night, the intention seeking liberation arises, then the thought of renunciation has been generated. So, prosperities of cyclic existence. So these are all the contaminated pleasures, contaminated forms of pleasures that we experience in samsara. So whatever pleasures we experience, you could be born as a deity, as a very powerful deity, as a Indra or a Brahma in the form realms, as a Indra in the desire realm, or as a universal monarch. All the pleasant attributes that you associate with this kind of an existence, with these kind of forms, these are perceived by us typically as perfections, or what this is prosperities. But these are merely forms of suffering. So these, as we have seen, are either suffering of change or pervasive suffering. So because there's no suffering of change in the higher realms, suffering of suffering, there these prosperities or perceived perfections that we see in these so-called higher rebirths, these are merely suffering of change or pervasive suffering. And they're bound to change. They're bound to change into suffering later on. So whenever we develop attraction to this kind of these kind of perfections, we need to cultivate some sort of an attitude of renunciation towards them. So whether there's an attraction towards a material thing, or attraction to power or authority, or attraction to physical might, or attraction to the beauty of youth, all these are objects of our attraction. All these are things that we perceive as perfections of this world, prosperities of samsara. But we need to realize that we are essentially in the nature of suffering. We are suffering of change, or suffering of, or pervasive suffering. Then we should invoke the same kind of revulsion that a person who is suffering, who has an illness, some sort of an illness which triggers vomiting, at the sight of food. If he sees food, he vomits. We need to kind of develop a renunciation similar to that kind of revulsion. When you see these kind of prosperities, when you see these kind of perfections. So these perfections or prosperities are mere clones of a fundamental nature of suffering. And they're just different forms of the suffering. So we need to have unqualified revulsion towards these kind of perfections and prosperities. So when you have that kind of revulsion, and that revulsion, not just a non-attraction to these perfections, that non-attraction has to be sustained. It has to be present in your mind stream day and night. So, and day and night, and whether you are, you're walking, or you're moving around, you're lying down, or you're sleeping, or you're sitting, even in your dreams, when you persist with that, you sustain that kind of attitude of revulsion to these prosperities or these perfections. That's when you may you can claim that you can have you have cultivated renunciation. But mere non-attraction is not sufficient. You need to combine that non-attraction to these perfections with an attitude that aspires for complete liberation from these perfections. You need to and this aspiration for liberation also happens only if you have invested some time in cultivating the right view. Right view which tells you that this is the path that leads out of this, it leads you out of the samsara, it liberates you out of the samsara. So a person who has recognition of these truth of suffering, the truth of sources of suffering, the truth of the path, and he has this kind of revulsion to these perfections of samsara, and he has this revulsion which is sustained, and he can sustain it day and night, and he can sustain it in all activities of his, even in his dreams. It's only then that the person can claim to have cultivated renunciation. So one needs to cultivate this kind of flawless renunciation in order to advance on the Mahayana spiritual path, in order to cultivate bodhicitta, and then use that bodhicitta to accomplish the ultimate goal of enlightenment or Buddhahood. So this is what the fifth verse talks about. As you habituate in this way, and when not even an instant, even not for a moment, you have an admiration for the prosperities of cyclic existence. And when this thought aspiring for liberation arises day and night, at this point, true renunciation has arisen. So this is this verse talks about the measure or the indicator of you having cultivated renunciation. So these are the 5 verses that describe the practice of renunciation. From here on, the text discusses the mind of enlightenment, and then it talks about the practice of how to cultivate the right view. So we'll pause here. In the next session, we'll discuss the practices of bodhicitta and the right view. So we'll just do a very short meditation to just recollect the essential points of what we've discussed today. And as you had seen in the 4th verse, in the first part of the 4th verse, we talked about by cultivating in mind that this human life is so hard to find, yet has no time to spare, preoccupations with this life will cease. So that becomes the first kind of entry point for you to cultivate renunciation. It's renunciation for pleasures of this lifetime, but then that can mature into renunciation of pleasures of subsequent future lifetimes also. And how does that come about? You have to realize that this human life is hard to find, and there is no time to spare in this human lifetime. And you do that by there's a very specific kind of practice we can engage in, which is the mindfulness of death, which can help you cultivate this attitude, cultivating an attitude that sees human life as being hard to find, and that there will be no that there is no time to spare in this lifetime. So let's just do that meditation. So there's in the handout you have a small flow chart. We'll just go through this flow chart. So what this flow chart does is, if you see this sheet, it talks about the flow chart symbols. So the first symbol indicates the beginning or the end of the meditation process. The second symbol is some sort of an ascertainment. The third symbol, the rhombus kind of thing, is a decision. You invoke some sort of a decision, yes or no kind of thing, and then you invoke some sort of a probe or proof analysis, some sort of reasons or analogies or citations or formal logic to prove or disprove the decision, and then the arrows indicate the meditation order. So just go through this flow chart, and the first beginning of this meditation, the meditation and mindfulness of impermanence death, talks about recollect the 6 benefits and the 6 drawbacks of the mindfulness of death. So you're aware of these benefits and drawbacks of the mindfulness of death from your previous discussions, and then ascertain that you're blessed with the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments. I just described the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments. And then you can come to this decision box, which asks you, are you certain that these 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments will abide? And if you believe that they will abide, then you come to the next point. You can ask yourself, do you think that death is not inevitable? And if you think that death is not inevitable, then you go through the 3 reasons why death is inevitable and why a meeting with the Lord of Death, Yama, is inevitable. And then if you believe that that is inevitable, then you ask yourself, death is inevitable, but there can be a way to either postpone it by bribing somebody or something like that. So do you think that wealth or friends and relatives will help you postpone death? So if that is the case, then we can invoke the 3 reasons why wealth or dear ones or your own body would help you at the point of death. And then you need to come to the point where you are certain that death is inevitable. But you would still kind of grasp at the permanence of your life, and you would think that I still have time, and that the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments will hold for some more time. So I think that the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments will hold for some more duration. So if you think that way, then you invoke the 3 reasons why the time of death is uncertain. And let's go to the first decision box again. If you think that the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments will not abide in this lifetime, but there's a likelihood that you will be united with these 8 freedoms and 10 endowments in the next lifetime. If you're certain that you will have them in next lifetime, then recollect the turtle analogy and think about how rare it is to attain a human lifetime which is endowed with the freedoms and the endowments. And through both these branches of the analysis, you come to the ascertainment that death is inevitable, and ascertain that the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments are very rare and can be easily lost. And if you come to that ascertainment, then you would strive to ensure that there is at least the possibility that there's happiness in the next lifetime or beyond. So you strive to ensure that you have a life form in your next lifetime, which is still kind of characterized by some of these freedoms, some of these endowments. So you strive to ensure that there is happiness in life and beyond. So that's the flow of this meditation. So just over shorter time, maybe just for 2 minutes, just go through this. So just relax in your seats, posture, and just close your eyes and make yourself just compose your mind, just collect your mind, and make sure that there's no chatter in your mind. Just observe your breath for a moment. Just observe the in-breath and the out-breath. Then, as you observe your in-breath and out-breath, just recollect the discussion that we had today. So just recollect the need to cultivate this mindfulness of death. So the text talks about 6 specific drawbacks and of not cultivating mindfulness. It also talks about 6 benefits. So I'll just briefly list those. If you do not cultivate mindfulness, then you not remember Dharma. Even if you remember Dharma, you not practice it. Even if you practice, you not practice it properly. Even if you practice it properly, you not practice it seriously. And then you let anger and jealousy and these kind of afflictions characterize your actions, and then you engage in a lot of negative karma, karmic activities, and create negative karma that propels you back in samsara. And at the time of death, you will die a death which is full of regret. So these are the 6 drawbacks, and the opposite of these are the benefits. So just reflect these drawbacks, and then think about the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments, and the 4 freedoms from unfavorable conditions as non-humans, and the freedoms from the 400 unfavorable conditions of humans, and the 8 personal endowments, and the 5 personal endowments, and the 5 endowments that pertain to others. Think about these 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments, and just ask yourself if you think that they will abide. And if you think that they will abide, then ask yourself that if you think they will abide because you're not going to die, and if you think that death is not inevitable, then invoke the first part of the meditation, the 9-point meditation on death, the three roots and the 9 reasons. So invoke the reasons why death is inevitable. So you will inevitably unite with Lord of Death, Yama. Why? Because whatever kind of human form, whatever kind of physical form you take, it's not going to be sufficient for you to avoid death. Even the countless Buddhas from the past, Arhants and the Pratik Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas have to face death. So there's no place on this in this universe where we can hide when death comes. We can't cheat death. And there are no practices that we can invoke at the time of death, which we can use, maybe chanting of mantras or some sort of clairvoyant powers. We just don't have those abilities to avoid death. So, and then lifespan that we have is dictated by the karmic forces that we have created in the past. So every moment that we live, our lifespan is getting depleted. So we're not going to be able to add to our lifespan at all. So all these kind of reasons make death inevitable. So if you now realize that death is inevitable, you still kind of maybe think that although death is inevitable, I can cheat death. So maybe I can bribe the Lord of Death, Yama, at the time of death. So just realize that no amount of wealth, no kinds of friends or dear ones or the body can help you at the time of death. So just invoke those reasons to realize that friends and relatives and wealth and your body is not going to help you prevent that when that comes. So through those reasons, you then come to the conclusion that indeed the 8 freedoms and 10 endowments can be taken away from me. But I still have time. Maybe the 8 freedoms and 10 endowments will abide for some more time. So if you think that you still have some time, you have time to spare, and think about the fact that the timing of death is uncertain. It's uncertain because the factors that contribute, that can take away your life force in our environment, outnumber the factors that can sustain our life force. Our bodies are fragile. They're in the form of a water bubble. Even the most innocuous of accidents can terminate our life force. A thorn prick can lead to our deaths. So just think about all these reasons and conclude that the timing of death is uncertain. Anytime this life force can be taken away from us. Now, if you think that the 8 freedoms and 10 endowments will not abide in this lifetime, but in the next lifetime you may get those 8 freedoms and 10 endowments. If you think that, then just reflect on the turtle analogy and think about how rare human rebirth is and how it is difficult to obtain those 8 freedoms and 10 endowments again. So through these kind of reasonings, you ascertain that the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments are indeed quite rare, quite difficult to obtain, and can be lost easily. Just arrive at this ascertainment. And let that ascertainment then motivate you to strive to ensure that even in not just in this lifetime, even in future lifetimes, we remain united with the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments until we sufficiently advance on the spiritual path. So with that, with this pause, we'll just end the session with a short dedication. So by virtue of these merits that I've accumulated to all these practices that I've done, may I attain the state of a completely enlightened Buddha, so that I can help other sentient beings out of the cycle of samsara. So may the Supreme Je Bodhicitta, which is not arisen, arise and grow. May that which is not arisen arise, and may that which has arisen prosper and grow. And may I attain the state of a completely enlightened Buddha soon. Okay, so with that dedication, we'll just stop here. Thank you.
We ask if you have any questions, we don't have to.
It's already late, so. Or you mean the online ones? Yeah.
We have quite,
Is there any question?
no, there are no questions.